Everybody, I think we're at 8, so we'll go ahead and get started. Oh, Christopher's waving at Colette here. He's met her before. So I've actually got a special guest today. This is Colette, our youngest. Say hi. She doesn't talk much, but we just got her in speech therapy and she's doing really well. So she's not going to answer any questions today, but she wanted to hang out. She'll probably get bored in 2 minutes and I'll send her out to get a bottle or something with her mother. She's got an older sister named Ellie, who's 4 3/4. And then the big news is we've got a third on the way who's coming in September 7th. So the month of September for me is going to be probably paternity leave. But anyway, so questions about parenting at a startup are, of course, welcome, or more business-related things. So wherever you want to take this. So let me open up the doc. I think I saw one question from Darren in there already. Oh, good. There's a few in there. So Darren says, I'd love GitLab to be an enabler for new and existing companies to go all remote. What key elements of GitLab would you surface to a CEO or founder pitching in the product as part of an overall all remote strategy? Yeah, it's a keyboard. So yeah, I haven't really thought through like product ideas and things for all remote. I could talk about what I think is interesting about all remote. And maybe we could tease some product ideas out of that. So the first thing I think would be like the all part of all remote. I think that gets really overlooked. There's a bunch of founders, people in my network that periodically reach out to me. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Let's send you out to mama. Okay. That's daddy. Yeah. Go get a baba. Thanks for indulging me on that. So all remote. Yeah, so people in my network periodically reach out to me and they're like, hey, I'm thinking of starting something new. We want to do this remote thing. And almost universally, they're all attempting to do some kind of hybrid thing. Like 2 different offices, how do I get them to work together? And I think to some extent, that's actually a false economy. I've done partial remote or hybrid remote before, and it's really, really difficult. I was a remote manager for 3 years and even managing teams. If I didn't, chat someone 5 minutes before every meeting and remind them to turn on the video conferencing system, they would forget about me. And so I very much felt like a second-class citizen, even as a director at a software organization. So I would encourage companies to really kind of go all in and do all remote. I think on-premise is somewhat easy because you're all in the same space together. All remote is somewhat easy because you're all in the same digital space together and there's no first and second-class citizenry. And then there's a gulf or a valley in between. And I think that's a little bit of a danger zone. So I would encourage companies to think about going kind of all in. That's one point. The other I would say is you have to write stuff down. So even if you don't have a handbook like we have, maybe it's a wiki, you have to document stuff because that's the only way to avoid synchronous meetings. And you can't be a large company, you can't be a global company if you're going to rely on face-to-face meetings. Everybody that I talk to that has done that, I say, how do you manage the time zone problem? And they say, well, as the manager, I usually just take the hit. So I'm working Sunday mornings or every evening or some combination of that. And it obviously is very trying on that one person. It's like a single point of failure, and they inevitably burn themselves out, and that's why they're looking for a new job. So, we use a static site generator, in part because we're trying to dog food source control in CI. Not every company needs to do that. So for them, like a wiki with a different publishing flow might be suitable. But if you're not writing stuff down, if you're not documenting it, and if you don't have a way to carry on async conversations, I think you're limited to a small band of time zones. And I would think maybe I might be misquoting this, but I believe the only all remote company that's larger than us today is Envision, but I think they limit their time zones to North America, so they've sort of constrained that problem. We're obviously trying to go global, and that means we've got to have an approach to that. So something around documentation, writing stuff down, and coaching and async culture is quite important. And then the things that are kind of unsolved problems in my mind are like, I obviously have kids, so I think about them entering the workforce after college in a few years, and what it would be like for them to start their career with no office, with no colleagues that they're learning from, at least not in person. So this issue of, eventually we want to be hiring new grads right out of college and setting them up for success, and how we do that for people that don't already have some other corporate experience. I don't know that we know how to do that yet. So I would be excited if we could start an internship program soon. I think we'd have to start working on that now for next summer, because in my experience, you have to start recruiting for interns in about December to populate the following summer's class. And that may just be too aggressive for us, but if not, definitely the year after. I think if we really want to be the leader here, I think we have to solve that sort of like new grad, new employee, entry level situation, which is a hard problem to solve potentially. But getting sort of speculative, I could consider, or I could conceive, a generation from now, cities sort of being unintentionally reorganized around this principle. People graduate, they move into the city. They have all the culture and the community stuff around them. Maybe they don't have a car. They can walk to everything that they need socially and life-wise. And then they go to a co-working space or something like that. And they have in-person colleagues. They don't work for the same company, but they have that same sort of feel. And maybe in that world, employment is even more fluid. Maybe more people are doing freelancing or contracting or something like that. Or it's just more common to slide around between different countries, because you would have a lot more, I think, cross-pollination happening in that world where you're physically located next to people that work for different companies than you, and that would come with strengths and weaknesses as well. And the other thing I would say is that, like, I think, it's easy to think of GitLab and our values like iteration and transparency and the separate facts that we're all remote, and some of the other things that distinguish us as sort of orthogonal, like separate properties. But I think transparency is actually really important to making all remote work. And so I wouldn't overlook that. That's part of writing everything down. But we're relatively isolated from one another. We only get the chance to hang out in person once, maybe twice a year. And trust is really important. And I think the way I've seen normal companies function, not without transparency, but certainly with lesser degrees of transparency, I could see a lot more paranoia creeping in. And so I wouldn't be surprised if, again, 20 years from now, when this all remote thing has been figured out and everybody's doing it, that everybody hasn't independently derived that being a very transparent company is quite important to this. We did the e-group read a book for the last offsite before our NOLA contribute, New Orleans contribute. It's called Crucial Conversations. And in it, there was a statistic, and it was a throwaway statistic. It was just in a sidebar, almost unrelated to the rest of the content in that chapter. And they just said what they called virtual teams. That was their word for all remote. They said, research shows that they're 3 times more likely to suffer negative consequences due to back channeling and gossip and all these other things. And then they just went on to the next topic. And that really jumped out to all of us who had read the book of like, wow, we want to read that paper and understand that more. Certainly we think that all remote is a net strength of GitLab and a huge one, but it doesn't come for free. There's negatives as well. And this maybe appears to be one of them. I see relatively little of that at GitLab. And I think that's because we really push transparency. So I encourage everybody to live that value and try to take that one extremely seriously. So with that, in terms of product ideas, there's probably, there's definitely something around this documentation problem and enabling async conversations. There's probably a bunch of things, right? Like wikis and Slack. I mean, those 2 categories could turn into whole, or those 2 things, or rather, could turn into whole categories for product companies to enable others to work all remote. Obviously, video conferencing things like Zoom that we use are integral to that as well. And who knows, in 20 years, maybe it's virtual reality, maybe it's something even more immersive than video conferencing is today. So hopefully that gets someone who's entrepreneurial, who's interested in starting a company kind of thinking. I'm happy to talk more about that if people have follow-up questions, but that's just what I can think of sort of off the cuff. So number 2, Heather, can you talk a little bit about your leadership style and philosophy? And for others looking to develop their leadership skills, what are some tools, books, podcasts, blogs, et cetera, you'd recommend? Lastly, how do you ensure you continue to grow as a leader? Yeah, good question. I do have a Readme. Let me dig that up. Lyle just reorganized all the engineering Readmes into one directory, so they're very discoverable now. I encourage people to create their own or to check out the ones that are there. Let's see. Engineering readmes. I'll just put the link into our documentation, but if you Google GitLab engineering readmes, this will come up. But this talks a little bit about my leadership style. I mentioned servant leadership a lot. I kind of view all the different specialties you need to create a software product, like front end, back end, security, DevOps, all as different specialties. And engineering to me is just another specialty. And with that becomes, rather it comes an imperative to sort of give that skill back to your peers to make them more effective. I think it's really important to be principled and flexible at the same time. Someone once called that, I think there's a book in it called Persist Variously, which is kind of a sort of interesting way to say that. Meaning you have to have some core, some kernel of yourself that is going to be unchanging. But then you have to be very flexible at how you implement that stuff, because I think part of a manager's responsibility is to be whatever the team needs in a given time frame, and quite often that's surprising. When I started engineering management, however long ago, I definitely didn't think I was going to spend this much of my career recruiting and talking to candidates and building teams. But in this generation of startups, there's a lot more money and ideas than there are engineers to execute on them. So building teams is the thing that most engineering leaders are called to do right now. And maybe that won't be the case 10 years from now, but certainly that surprised me how much time I had to spend on it and how good I had to get at that particular thing. Let's see what else. In terms of how I keep learning, I think I could probably talk a lot about this, but the most important thing is how you accept feedback. It's not always easy. It's not always fun to hear stuff about yourself that is surprising or negative, but it's really important to not just receive it well, but signal that you're open to that sort of thing. So hopefully I do an okay job of that, and have people helping me what I can improve, because it's mostly what you don't know that gets you, right? Or actually, I just watched The Big Short a few nights ago, and I think it opens with a quote from Mark Twain that said, "It's not what you don't know that gets you, it's what you know for sure that just ain't so," right? So two ways of saying it's blind spots, and other people can act as a mirror for you and help that. So I think that's the single most important thing, is just being recognize that you're an unfinished project, and be open genuinely to feedback and to change. Clement, number 3, not on the call. He says, what are your thoughts on how the engineering org is doing in terms of diversity and inclusion? Yeah, great question. And for those that didn't see it, Clement just got a change merge where our diversity value became diversity and inclusion, because that's sort of the boring solution. That's the way people are referring to this out there. And even though it's 2 words, it's a D and an I, it still is a better way to articulate our diversity value. So the first thing I'd say is this is really important. It's important to the company, and it's important to me. As someone though who doesn't hit a lot of the axes of diversity myself, I try to do more listening than talking on this topic. I've learned a lot from listening to women leaders in engineering and racial minorities. And something that's unique to GitLab is regional diversity, which is something most companies really don't have a sort of sense of. But again, us wanting to remain global, that's quite important to us. So I'm proud of the progress that we've made. I think to go further though, like we have to get very strategic, and we have to start to use things like statistics. So we're going through a change right now to become a more metrics-driven organization. We're building out these performance indicators, and diversity is one of them. But of course, there's many different types or axes of diversity, and we're going to track all of them. I think my understanding of the current situation is that we've made very solid progress on gender diversity in engineering. It's more than doubled since I've been here, but we're nowhere near where we want to be. So we want to keep pushing that further and further. Racial diversity is tricky to track. It's a lot more complicated than the other sort of axes. So obviously we work with people ops, they're the experts. And I believe what they're doing is taking the equal employment opportunity framework from the US government and applying that. And so I think I want to say that the tentative direction is to make OHR the single source of truth for that, and then to actually chart it. And we'll have transparent Periscope dashboard so everybody could see how we've been doing and doing over time. And then Lucas actually charted our regional diversity. There's an issue hanging out there. Maybe he or someone else can dig it up, where he built a table based on the team YAML file that drives the org chart in the handbook. And I was able to demonstrate that, hey, we're becoming more North American centric at the company. It's slow, it's over time, but it is a marked trend. And I threw that into Excel and I charted it because I like visuals with data. And sure enough, yeah, that seems to be a trend. So again, making this a performance indicator and is really important. And the strongest way we have to influence that one way or the other, based on what we see, is with the sourcing front. We're very fortunate to be in a time of high growth as a company. And that means that we can change our composition through our hiring process. Engineering is growing 130% this year, so we can correct things much faster, I think, than other companies have the opportunity to. So we'll have our sourcers just make sure that they make that the top of the funnel for our recruiting process look as close to society as we can make it, and then we'll hire the best people out of it, and then we'll become a more diverse company over time. Number 4, remember to have people read their questions if present. Yeah, thanks for the tip. So the next is Miguel. If Miguel's on, does he want to speak to his own question?
Yeah, I wanted to ask, what are the top metrics that you use to track the success of the efforts in engineering in the company? And if you want to add any more metrics that are not yet possible to track.
Oh yeah, we've got, let me take a couple of links for you, but I'll talk while I'm doing. So if you Google GitLab engineering performance indicators, this page will come up. So this is driven off yet another YAML file in the data directory of the handbook. And this captures all of the performance indicators that we currently have. There's an aspect to each one called maturity, and that kind of indicates, hey, is this just an idea, or is this thing fully automated and we've already got the data visualized in Periscope, or somewhere in between? And then separate from maturity, we have a notion of health. And health is about the metric itself. What is this metric telling us about the business? And are we happy with it, or is it a problem, or is it just something we need to kind of keep an eye on? And lots of these are just kind of like, very low maturity because we just came up with them weeks or months ago. The other thing we're doing is I have a Google Doc here that is engineering families and performance indicators. So this is an interesting ambition by Sid. Sid said he's never seen a company be able to take data and performance indicators down to individual levels. That doesn't mean being Big Brother and using metrics to look over people's shoulder. It means just being clear and transparent with people. What about your role can be measured that is valuable, so you can be self-service figuring this stuff out. And I want to point that out because it's a long-standing best practice in agile software that you focus on team metrics, not individual metrics. Because if you focus on individual metrics, you tend to get more selfish behaviors. Like, the day before that feature freeze, you're just trying to get your own stuff out rather than lend a code review to one of your peers or something like that. We want to incentivize team behaviors, not individual behaviors. That's really important to underscore. But what we're going to do is put these performance indicators in the job families for each role on our job descriptions. That way, people who don't even work here or considering working here can read the job description and see what data will be interesting or valuable to them to be successful in their jobs before they even work here. So set the expectation right away that we're going to be metrics driven. But of course, not everything can be metrics driven. There's a lot, especially because we're a fast growing startup. We need people to use their instincts and their experience to make quick decisions. So I usually think of it as I like to be instinct first, and then harden and improve those instincts with data when we have the time. And so for things like engineering, we look at the overall throughput, the volume of MRs that we're shipping every month. We look at because we're in a time of growth, we have a separate metric that's related, which is the average number of MRs per engineer. And again, we don't look at specific engineers. We're looking at the average and aggregate over the whole group, because that can tell you, yeah, sure, you'd expect with how fast we're growing, the overall volume is increasing. But is it increasing in proportion with the people that we've hired? And then we learn things from that, like how quickly can we get people up to max productivity and whatnot. So that's a big one. UX has a really interesting one called System Usability Score. And this is a good example of a boarding solution. It's kind of a industry standard out there for how usable your UI is. And it's something that you learn from doing a very specific sort of research exercise where you poll your users and have them fill out a survey, and you get like, I think it's a 1 to 100 sort of number. And then we, of course, do that by stage because our application is so broad, and we can see differences in maturity of the different stages of the DevOps lifecycle. And so we find we have hotspots, and we can intervene or address those things. But I welcome you to read this page, and we're happy to accept merge requests. Everybody can contribute. So if you have another piece of data you think is important, or if you don't like one of the descriptions or the state of maturity of health of one of these, feel free to do an MR and send it over to me. My directors also have them. So one of the links on this page is other performance indicator pages. So you can see development, UX, support, et cetera, all separate from engineering. Kenny, I see you on camera. Do you want to speak to your question?
Sure, thanks. And I love the KPI stuff. Yeah, your organization is scaling quite rapidly, and you have a number of different functional groups within your organization. I'm wondering how you and the team encourage collaboration between those different functional and also product section groups.
Yeah, and it's not just within the organization, right? Like it's obviously engineering and product management. That's the most important relationship that we have, certainly. And so we think a lot about that as well. Stable counterparts are probably the main thing that we try to exercise here. So people at GitLab have functional managers. Like if you're a designer, your manager is a former designer who knows what your job is, how you do it, what tools are involved. And if the worst came to it, they could probably jump on the queue and handle a unit of work. But to do your job, you obviously need to collaborate with, if you're a designer, front-end engineers, product managers, other groups. And so that's why we have the stable counterpart metaphor. So everybody has a title, and then they've got, comma, usually a DevOps stage, something related to an area of our product, and that denotes who is going to be collaborating with on a day-to-day basis. That's the most important thing I think that we have. And then other things we do, like something we added recently is our infrastructure team is now grooming a board of issues that others have created or that they have created related to GitLab.com availability. And they severitize those issues, so to speak. I don't think that's actually a word, but it sounds good. And now we have a weekly meeting, a synchronous meeting, so an expensive meeting, and PM and development and infrastructure, as well as quality, myself meet, and we talk about the most important issues for GitLab.com, and we get those prioritized. So that's actually a form of influence or feedback into the product management organization from an engineering perspective. And then we took the decision on Monday to do the same thing with regard to performance, which is related but technically separate from availability, and quality is going to manage that as well. And so hopefully that gets the best information into the heads of the product managers, who are also taking information from customers, from prospects, from executives, from the salespeople, from professional services and customer success, so that we can make the best decisions to prioritize what goes into the next release. All right, I think last couple of questions. We got 5 minutes left. Jeff B., what is something that you wish you had known earlier in your career? Well, I know I was sort of a homegrown manager. You could use the phrase "raised by wolves." So I didn't get a lot of training and whatnot. I was naive early on and thought, oh, well, I don't like politics. Nobody likes politics. I'm going to be apolitical. And I very quickly got my lunch eaten in my first job because of that. And so where I've ended up is, I do believe I don't like office politics or corporate politics, but it's important to be politic, so to say, which means being aware of other people and their motivations so that you can be effective. And you can defend against politics because of that. So I view my role in part as creating hopefully as pleasant environment as I can for everybody in my group. And that means understanding other groups and their motivations, and keeping things as empirical and as calm as I possibly can. So that took a while for me to figure out personally. Maybe I was in a deficit and other people just get that a little bit more naturally, but that was my first big learning lesson. And then Hendrik says, in scaling GitLab.com, and I'm reading these just because I think we get one more in. In scaling GitLab.com, there are some unique challenges that our customers may not face, but may impair us at GitLab.com level scale. How can we improve prioritization of longer-term improvements on infrastructure and engineering side to prevent now small issues from quote unquote blowing up in the future? Also considering that those might not be iterative and thus might be contradicting our values. Well, I think what I mentioned earlier in response to Kenny around collaboration, this new meeting we're doing where infrastructure has a direct line into product management and is letting them know what they think the most important issues are in a formalized way is probably the most important thing. But I would disagree that I think everything can be iterative. That's the only part of this I would sort of question. I think there's a great diagram on the product management section that shows how to be iterative. And the first thing says like, what's not iterative? And it's like, a wheel of a car and then the frame of a car and then like a broken car and then finally a fast car that you can drive. And like, that's not actually iteration, right? Because it doesn't provide any value until the end. What is iteration is, walking, a scooter, a bicycle, and then a car. All modes of transportation are all functional in that way, but obviously they get more and more performant over time. And so I guarantee if we think through what we need to do, there is an iterative way to deliver these things on GitLab.com and put them in the GitLab project so that they provide value to other customers. Separate from that, we're developing what we call 10K reference architectures for our self-managed, what other businesses call on-premise customers. And infrastructure has a hand in those as well. And so you could view those as sort of stops on a spectrum of scalability, ending with GitLab.com, that being by orders of magnitude the largest instance of GitLab in the world. So I think there's an iterative way to do this. I've yet to see something that can't really be iterative. But sometimes you ship something that is so small it's not viable. You have to do something a little bit larger just to make it a minimum viable change. Maybe that's sort of what you're striking at. That can definitely be true. So anyway, we're a few minutes away. It's always good to end a little bit early and give people time to get settled before the next meeting. So thanks everybody for the great questions. And this conversation doesn't have to end here. I do weekly office hours on Thursdays. Every other week is morning my time or afternoon my time. So it should be friendly to EMEA and APAC hours, depending on when you come. And so, I welcome more questions or thoughts, or just jump in my VP Slack channel and ask away. But thanks and talk soon. Cheers.